Good morning. I think I have to start by telling you about that extensive private sector experience, because it really did shape my life. I spent 6 years in the mining business, and then finished up an MBA at DU, and I joined a little startup company called Pace Membership Warehouse. How many of you were members of Pace Membership Warehouse at some point in the past? A few of you. Pace was a rocket ship, man. We went 0 to 5 billion in 5 years. And when I was 29, Charlie Steinberg made me a senior VP of finance, and he said, "Here's the deal, Tom. I want you to chair the Chamber of Commerce Education Committee. I want you to join the board of the Colorado Children's Campaign, and I want you to join Leadership Denver." And the combination of those three activities in about a month changed my life. I know Bill Ritter and I were in the class of Leadership Denver. We were two young, ambitious guys, kind of focused on our own career, and we were thrown into a room with a group of people that we probably would not have hung out with. And I know Bill would say the same, that really helped change our view and the trajectory of our career. But Barbara Bryan is really the one who got me serious. She took me to West Denver, showed me schools, showed me data, and I remember saying, "Barb, somebody's got to do something about this." And she said, "Yeah, it's you." So Colorado Succeeds is really special to me because it's very aligned with my background of having come from the private sector and having been convinced of the fact that education is critically important for all of us, and the only path forward are community conversations and community partnerships. And that's really what we're here to celebrate today. One of the things that Barb did for me is she helped me build kind of a new mental model of how the world worked and what my role was in that mental model. I want to start with a quick poem from another changing time. This was in about 1940. Lewis MacNeice, you can imagine him, an Irish poet, looking out across the channel and beginning to see that the world was changing again, right? The world had suffered one big war and it was falling into a second big war, and he said, "Each of us have known mutations of the mind when the world jumped and rivers gushed from what had seemed a pool. For every static world that you or I impose on the real one must crack at times, and new sensations open like a rose." I love the fact that he says every model that you or I create will at some point crack because it just doesn't match the world anymore. And I don't know about you, but for the last 3 years, I've been studying the future of work and the future of life together on planet Earth, and it has resulted in my mental model cracking. And I don't know about you, but I'm in the middle of trying to build a new model of what a sustainable economy looks like, one that works for all of us. A sustainable ecology, a planet that we can share together. So I think a lot about this poem and this work that we're doing together of trying to create new models of how we can successfully live together. Our study of artificial intelligence and the future of work led us to a surprising conclusion that it's a big frickin' deal, that it is really quickly become ubiquitous in every sector. And we concluded that it's very likely to have more impact on the lives and livelihoods of young people than any other factor. And when we wrote that report in the fall of 2017, I had never experienced a conversation about it, about AI or machine learning, or more broadly, exponential technology and what it meant for futures. I had never seen evidence of that conversation going on in American high schools. And so I felt this real paradox of, holy cow, The world just changed. We entered a new era where there's a new set of driving forces, and there's nobody in American schools having this conversation. Now, if we fast forward 3 years, that has changed a lot, in part as a result of organizations like Colorado Succeeds, America Succeeds, Battelle for Kids, and lots of other advocacy organizations that have, along with our work, sort of tried to jump up and down and say, hey, it's a really big deal. We need to talk about what's happening in the world, and as a result, what kids need to know and be able to do. So when I say AI is a big deal, I'm saying machine learning specifically, its relationship with big data, a set of enabling technologies, and that combination of machine learning, big data, and enabling technologies are transforming every single sector of society. We made a list of about 120 current applications in every sector of society. I put that list up just to indicate that every sector, every segment of life is quickly being changed by code that learns. Code that learns just means that 3 or 4 years ago, we used to tell computers what to do, and increasingly, they are figuring it out on their own. Turns out that's a really big deal. So here's a couple of implications that we have identified. Scott and team would call this the age of agility. When I think about what are the top line implications, number one, every field is computational. So I went back to Colorado School of Mines. I'm here to report it was a horrible place in the 70s when I was there, and it is really a great place, alive, with innovation, focused on teaching and learning, student-centered. It's still challenging, but a really, really great place. And with President Paul Johnson, we talked about how every field is computational and how, like MIT, they're trying to build a computer science capability that cross-cuts every other field, so that in every subject, whether it's math or chemical engineering or energy, that you're studying that plus data science. So a 15-year-old friend of mine told me a few months ago, I want to be a biologist. And I said, oh, you'll be a data scientist. She said, no, I want to be a biologist. And I said, listen, you'll be a data scientist. There is no question in biology today that is not computational, where you're not asking, what's the data set behind the question that I'm most interested in, right? It's true in energy. What's the big data set? What are the right tools that we can point at that data set? So this is the new thing that we need to add to our guidance systems, that we need to help kids understand every career cluster has become computational. Number two, because work is so complex, we now work in teams. I was really happy to see at Mines that so much of the work is now done in teams. But the ironic thing is that about almost half of high school kids are going to do that as freelancers in the gig economy or the freelance economy, at least at some point. They'll often go back and forth between employment and freelancing. So you have this dichotomy of delivering in teams, but at least occasionally doing it as a freelancer. Number three, we live, learn, work, play, and shop on platforms. Platforms that have become gigantic, global. And that has some great implications, but it has some really scary implications, as we've seen recently with privacy concerns. Number four, our kids are going to experience more novelty and complexity than we can imagine. My granddaughter will probably see 10 times the novelty and complexity that I did, and my career was in the information age, right? When we began to use computers and data behind everything. And it's not just technology that's changing, it's the human impact on the planet, the Anthropocene, and the fact that we're going to see more and more extreme weather. Here in the West, we're going to experience a lot more fires. In the East, we're going to experience a lot more hurricanes. So you have this man-made technology. It's colliding with natural systems in ways that we really can't predict very well. Add that all together, our kids are going to face a lot of novelty and complexity. Here's the problem. They go to schools characterized by routine and compliance. Like it's the worst thing that you could do to subject kids to routine and compliance when their lives are going to be full of novelty and complexity. The last thing I'll note is that City and County of Denver, State of Colorado, are going to face waves of extraordinarily complex challenges. There's no city, there's no state that has the civic infrastructure to deal with the stuff that's heading towards them. And so this has to be another part of our dialogue of how do we build resilient cities with agile government systems that are able to have dialogues and create temporary agreements that allow us to keep moving forward as a society. The good news is there's really cool stuff happening here in Colorado and around the country for kids. And so we're going to do a 15-minute sprint around the state and around the country looking at cool stuff that feels to me like agile education. I want to start by talking about agile educators. One of my new heroes is Herr Platt. David was a German teacher in Southern California, but something happened in Southern California about 20 years ago. The demographics started to change, so there were fewer kids taking German. So that's when David started becoming agile. He started teaching computer science in addition to German. Then he added an endorsement in computer science. Then he started a tech squad. Then he started teaching computer science, the AP computer science class. His tech team started a podcast, and Gabe and Kayla are on the right. They started bugging me about 6 months ago, and finally I called up their teacher and I said, who are these kids? Why are they bugging me? And they said, hey, Tom, they've been doing this investigation of exponential technology. They figured out that AI was a really big deal. They told me and my faculty about it, that we ought to be paying attention to it. And I said, wow, that is so amazing that this teacher who's become really agile in his own career, sort of changing his skill set as required, but he's unleashed these kids to study what they care most about and what's happening in the world. And now through this podcast, they're informing not only their own community, but the rest of the world. That's an agile educator. And close to home, my favorite Colorado educator is Alex Magana. Alex, how many of you have been to Grant Beacon with Alex? I bet a dozen, right? Alex is the real deal, right? So I love this guy. My wife and I do. So my wife went to Grant Beacon 50 years ago. It was not a good experience. And it got worse after we left. And Alex walked into that place about 8 years ago and was trying to be responsive to DSST, which had just opened at Byers. So Alex is looking around going, wow, there's all these really good schools popping up. What are we going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? And Alex led a team that built a really cool turnaround strategy. He was really smart about phasing it in. So they did blended and personalized learning one year, and then character development the next year, and then extended learning. So he made a comprehensive strategy, but he made the implementation doable. So a great, great example of an agile teacher leader, and he's now created an innovation network that has 2 schools and will soon spread to more. So go visit Grant Beacon's right by Wash Park. We're going to do a quick sprint to visit some schools and talk about some strategies that I think are really important. We're going to start with 3 skills that I think are critical for every kid. The first one is design thinking. DSISD is a great example of a new school that DPS opened that focuses on design thinking. So go take a look at that. Another one, many of you visited, it was referred to in the opening, Design Tech High on the Oracle campus. This would be in the top 10 best examples of design thinking in a secondary school in the world at this point. The second, let me make a quick comment about design thinking. So why is it a big deal? With novelty and complexity, what's key is that kids have the muscle memory to walk into complexity with confidence. To be humble about the complexity that they're facing, but to be confident that they know what to do first, right? They know what next step to take. So that next step might be define the problem that I'm facing, then do some empathy research about how people are experiencing that problem, then iterate some solutions so that they've got a structured problem-solving approach to walk into big, complicated problems. Related to that, entrepreneurial mindset would be the second key skill that we think is really important. In a narrow sense, your business schools teach you this about how to start a business. In the broader sense, this is really about spotting opportunity and delivering impact. One of our favorite examples is a Boise school. Tony and I are advisors to the school. It's a great school, and they also have, it started as an after-school program, and one of them is called Two Birds. It's a marketing agency that does fee-based work for Treasure Valley companies. So kids are actually running a viable business. They do good work. We've had them do work for us. I think every kid should have this experience of standing up a business, marketing customers, and delivering a product to customers and getting really hard feedback from a customer like, no, that's not what we wanted. You need to go back and do it again, right? That's super valuable to learn. There are 43 universities around the country that are in a network called Keynote. That's sponsored by the Kern Family Foundation. It's Kern Entrepreneurship in Engineering Network. Colorado School of Mines is part of it. ASU is part of it. A great example of infusing entrepreneurial mindset into engineering education. Number three, most important critical skill is social emotional learning, the ability to manage yourself, the ability to read social situations, to manage social interactions, and to collaborate effectively with diverse teams. It was really interesting. In every meeting that I had at Mines yesterday, we talked about team effectiveness. Is a real topic on campus about how do you form teams, how do you become effective in serving in teams. It's really great to see that be a focal point early in their career. One of my favorite examples of a network of schools, public schools that do this really well is the New Tech Network. These are 200, mostly high schools, mostly in public districts. They're project-based high schools, and on every project, students get feedback on agency. Did you own your own work and learning and their collaboration? How were you a productive member of this team? If you go online to New Tech Network, and you can search for their agency and collaboration rubrics. They're terrific. They're now used all over the country. 4 quick strategies that I think are important for Agile learning. The first is personalized learning. High Tech Elementary out at Stapleton is one of the best examples that I've seen of organizing small literacy groups. So first thing, most mornings, they break into small groups. Really good example of consistent strategies used in each one of the small groups. They have a lot of student teachers that come on campus, and so they get their groups into really small sizes like on the right. And in one of the lovely ironies, the school called High Tech has gone low tech, and they actually ditched computers and they use print reading material for the first hour and a half. But beautiful commitment to shared teaching strategies in small groups. In addition to Mines, which is now on my high on my list for PBL and engineering, what a lot of people consider the best engineering education in the world is a little boutique school in Boston called Olin. It's a great example of problem and project-based learning. I spent Friday there in a campus-wide seminar called Doing Good in the World. They were talking about how they were trying to infuse contribution into each of the projects that they were doing, to be mindful of how it would have impacts to direct customers, but also more broadly to society. Brett is opening a really cool school. Stand up, Brett. Brett is opening in the fall, and he has a super cool design. He is eligible and interested for corporate partnerships. He would love to have a chat with you after the meeting. There's not a school design that we're more excited about than the cube. I love, number 4 on the list is the mashups, these big integrated interdisciplinary projects. We love that as the centerpiece for a high school, so get involved in the cube. Another school that Tony and I know well is Teton Science School. So this is a couple of small private schools in Jackson Hole. I'm on their advisory board, and I have a bicycle clause in my advisory contract, which says, I'll come to your advisory meeting if you put me on a bike when I'm there. And this small network of private schools has launched a national network of public schools called the Place Network. These are rural micro schools. So this could be a really cool idea for communities like we were talking about last night, Tony, for Trinidad, for Holyoke, for small rural eastern and western Colorado towns. We just wrote a book with Teton Science on place-based learning, how to use the city as the classroom. It'll be out at the end of the year. Number 3 is advisory. So building structures that allow you to connect deeply with kids to monitor their academic and social progress. One of the best examples in the country is DSST, a great network here. DSST has a beautiful set of shared values, and every week, every student and every faculty member gets some feedback on how they're doing living those values. Another good example of this is a small district in outside of Milwaukee called Kettle Moraine, and they have a great advisory system. I also wanted to mention them because an agile strategy is starting micro schools. So this is a small district with a big comprehensive high school, and they started 3 small high schools inside the traditional high school. 2 teachers and 40 kids, interesting little experiments, one focused on global studies, one on health, one on performing arts, and now half of the kids in that school 5 years later go to one of those 3 schools. So a great example of start small, iterate, allow an innovation to become what it will become. And I love this idea because as a superintendent, I would have imposed career academies on the school and divided it up and made the community angry and my teachers hate me. But this is a great example of an innovator as superintendent that's finding teacher leadership, empowering it, and then letting it grow bottom up. Last one I wanted to mention, flexible spaces. We called flexible learning spaces the top trend of 2018. We're excited to see worldwide really cool, big flexible spaces and flexible seating, high and low, hard and soft. One of the best examples that we've seen is the Singapore American School. We've been working with them for the last 6 years. We've got great case studies and podcasts on it. I also mentioned it because that's where Boosberg is headed. I wanted you to know he's going to a super cool place that is on a really, really interesting trajectory. So check out gettingsmart.com if you want to read more about where Tom is headed. Let me close by just talking a little bit about some of the system level opportunities. Scott and I, for the last 2 days, have been talking about the community conversations to create new graduate profiles. We have found that there's no shortcut to having conversations with your community about what's happening, what does it mean, as a result, what do you think kids need to know and be able to do, what kind of learning experiences do you think would be most helpful, and building agreements around that. There's just no shortcut to doing that work. And we've seen states like Virginia and South Carolina that have done a good job of that, where they've built a profile, but they haven't imposed it on everybody. So they said, here's what we think future skills look like. Y'all go have that conversation and build a set of agreements for yourself. We're really excited about the potential for comprehensive learner records. So instead of a little report card that gets sent home, having a big digital record that will give us the ability to better communicate capabilities to stakeholders like employers and to higher education. I want to highlight a couple of Colorado innovators. Bulb is a Lafayette company that built a really cool digital portfolio. We think digital portfolios and these comprehensive learner records are going to be a really important part of how people communicate what they can do. And we think that's going to become in the long run, even more important than the degrees that they hold. Show me what you can do, not your pedigree. To do all of this, you need a really good longitudinal data system. Florida has been the leader in this space for 20 years. They can track a kid from preschool to the workforce. So they've done the best job of creating an interoperable data system of any state in the country. And then finally, we think we're at the beginning of the end of standardized testing. I feel like I have some culpability for No Child Left Behind and help erect that early policy construct. And it was a beautiful thing at the time. It was a bipartisan consensus that we needed to add measurement to ensure equity in education, but we've built these big week-long tests that everybody now hates. And it feels like we're at a point in time where formative assessment is getting so good. If you go to the STEM school, for example, they could tell you how all their kids are doing in every subject every day. They don't need to stop school at the end of the year to do a test. And so what we need to do are build systems that share that really rich formative data and make use of it so that we don't have to do this giant end-of-year test. So I think in the next 10 years, we're going to be able to figure this out. I mention it because I think Colorado could be, you have so many good school networks here that I think that could be key to moving towards reducing and then eventually eliminating this big end-of-year standardized tests. We just published a book on working in networks because we think this work is super difficult. We encourage schools to work in really loose networks like the lower left, which are just schools that come together around a set of principles, all the way to the upper right, which are managed networks like DSST. In one way or another, schools need to work together to do this work because it's just really, really complicated. A couple quick thoughts about the future of systems. So if we look a few years out, autonomous transportation and rideshare are going to revolutionize pupil transportation. I think in 10 years we'll see a lot less big yellow buses on the road. We'll see more smaller yellow buses on the road. Some of them won't have drivers. Kids are going to have access to things like, what's the rideshare that John runs now? Hop, skip, drive. We'll have a lot more of those. And Tony's team has led Reschool Colorado, which is trying to extend the amount of out-of-school learning opportunities that exist. And I think rideshare is going to be part of enabling that for many students. Another really provocative idea is, could we separate school facilities from school operations? In a lot of urban areas, urban populations are shrinking, and so you have too many buildings and they're falling into disrepair. And we think there's a big opportunity to sell those buildings and do a lease back and have a flexible leasing strategy like WeWork. It also would be part of making public facilities available to all public schools, which we don't do today. So we think there's interesting innovations coming up in both transportation and in facilities. A couple quick words on new pathways that are emerging. My favorite CTE program in the world is in Marion, Ohio. It's the best robotics training program in the world for teenagers. Scott on the right was one of 8 teenagers that received FANUC and Motoman certification in 2014. Honda hired him immediately, gave him a scholarship for college, and made him a trainer. And he travels the country training adults and college kids. He makes $100,000 now. He left college with $100,000 in his pocket instead of $100,000 in debt. And this was my first experience to these work and earn ladders that increasingly exist for young people. We were talking about P-Tech earlier with IBM. Where's John from IBM? There's a thanks to IBM and a couple other partners, there's now 110 of these P-Tech high schools that combine college credit opportunities with really cool tech work experiences, so kids leave often with an associate degree and lots of work experience and a job offer. So very cool. Big tech giant called Infosys that is creating training centers all over America and increasingly hiring people with a community college degree and then training them internally in tech careers. So we're excited about all these new post-secondary pathways. We're excited about kids moving directly into boot camps or doing boot camps plus colleges, community colleges and tech boot camps. And we're even seeing high school kids moving straight into startups and then having educational supports while they're in the middle of a startup. You'll hear more about Start Ed Up Foundation. This is a new entrepreneurship training program in Indiana that we're super excited about. Two more innovators. One's a Colorado company. Anybody know Rachel Carlson? Rachel's a terrific innovator here, Roy Romer's granddaughter, and she's stood up a great startup called Guild Education that is providing education as a benefit to companies around the country. Another example is Southern New Hampshire University, the biggest online nonprofit in the country. They have a competency-based, project-based program that supports working adults and is provided as a benefit. But two examples of these lifelong learning ladders. The last example is, as we all think about ourselves as lifelong learners, I wanted to point to another Boulder startup called Glue. Glue has built a very cool human development platform, and it starts with the primacy of relationship, acknowledging that most of us learn in relationship and grow in community. And they built an analytics platform that allows small groups, whether they're churches or addiction recovery centers or recidivism reduction groups, to help human beings grow. A great example of a Colorado company that's helping promote lifelong learning. So it's an exciting time, and agility is the key word. I love the agenda that America Succeeds and Colorado Succeeds have laid out. They focus on lifelong learners, agile systems, and agile educators. It's a great agenda. That's part of why you're here and part of why I'm here. I appreciate your presence today. It signals that you support agile learning and Colorado Succeeds. Thanks for letting me be part of it.